Will the world end? That's a question that our protagonists might be asking themselves in the opening scene of Fallout 4. If you've played the game, you might not take much notice of what plays out here. It's a very basic setup. The scene is striking though, as it's the first time we've played a character in a pre-war setting where everything is new and glistening. A Vault-Tec representative soon knocks on your door and asks for a bit of information from you, as you and your family have been given a spot at the nearby nuclear underground shelter Vault 111. But your character seems quite unconvinced with the prospects of nuclear war and total annihilation of the tranquility that you have at the moment. So, despite the very obvious foreshadowing by the Vault-Tec representative, you sort of dismiss him and you go back to tending to you and your family. This is then quickly accompanied by the actual end of the world. As I explored in a previous video, the alarm bells in the real world are ringing loudly. According to certain analysts, we are incredibly close to destroying ourselves and most of what we've built and cherished. Despite incessantly pedestaling our technological achievements, the fruits of our creativity and our intellectualism, we through these efforts also managed to noticeably offset the balance of the natural world to disastrous effects. Basically, you, everyone you know and love, are at the risk of destruction. This may seem dramatic to say, but if you're somehow doubting that we're in a dire state, I recommend you keep watching. And to those of you who don't want to read scientific research that highlight links between human productivity and stark environmental changes, Randall Munroe from XKCD has this very telling illustration that shows fluctuations in the average global temperature over the last 20,000 years, ending with where we are now and with forecasts for how things could go. There's also the threat of destructive warfare, and I'll go into this at greater depth in a future video. And then there's specifically the case of the Palestine-Israel conflict, which is often downplayed in its severity and impact on the world, but I'll get to that. My plan was to do this topic in a longer essay video, but that is taking too long to do at this very moment, and I really need to get this out of my system. And then I'll do the longer video, of course. But to get into the mood, there's this NPC from the Elder Scrolls game Oblivion, and specifically in its DLC, The Shivering Isles.
I'm Ingvar the Wanderer, although most people now call me Ingvar Doomsayer. It's true, the world is about to be destroyed.
There's this guy who was walking around Sheogorath's realm wearing practically nothing. I met him back in 2007 when I was playing the DLC the first time, and his existentialist stance was one I had never encountered before in my life.
Some people are frightened by this, or they despair, or even try to deny the truth of what I say. But my message is actually one of comfort. The world is ending, and we can't do anything about it. Once you accept that, you'll be at peace, like me.
Basically, he's an optimist nihilist, if that's possible. He actually gets sad when you as a player character save the world from its prophesized end. Who says the Elder Scrolls games don't have depth? In any case, I think what he says is an exemplary statement representing many people who are quite voyeuristic about the end of the world and the violence facilitating it. And it's actually very interesting. Both that these people are voyeuristic about it, but also the things that they are voyeuristic about. I don't personally find the situation in Palestine particularly interesting. It's horrific, barbaric, and outright cruel. I wish we were without it. Neither do I find what is happening to Ukrainian people worthy of political analysis. I also wish they were living in safety where they feel at home. What I do find interesting is the preceding and current geopolitical setup and human condition that allows these things to come into fruition, but while also I wish we would be without them, of course. Just as the TV show Veep has satirized political discourse and cynicism, but now is genuinely a tame viewing experience when considering just how psychopathic and exploitative real-world politics are. Equally so, Fallout's exploration of human cruelty is actually pretty horrifically accurate. In particular, in how rich and influential cultural and corporate establishments are well able to vocally support human rights and security, while also actively dismantling them for personal gains, resources, and land. What is happening in Palestine at the moment is visibly exemplifying rich countries' conquest for land and resources and the effect these actions have on people. A lot of focus is rightfully put on us here in the West and our psychopathic elites who will readily and knowingly kill tens of thousands of people, many of which include children, and displace the natural balance of the world if it means furthering their status, personal wealth, and influence. And this is where I know a few people watching this will be like, oh no, not another video about colonialism and blaming the West. Also, other countries like China and Russia are just as bad. Yes, but saying that should also come with the realization that we in the West are not any better than those places. The characters we meet in Fallout are desperate, either for their basic survival or for power, depending on the conditions you find them in. Everyone is coping with the aftermath of the end of the world, even though it took place centuries before we interact with the wastelands. And this desperation is furthered by the reality that humanity now has their entire surroundings against their odds. Radiation, lack of food, and clean water. And with large and powerful megafauna around, it's almost a complete scrambling of the food chain that was in place before the Great War. And humans are back in a setting where they have to compete with other animals at nearly equal footing. It's interesting also as a player character how you interact with the world. In the same way that we here in Europe eradicated wolves and bears to create safer surroundings for ourselves, you can also take out mutated chameleons, crabs, rats, bears, and cows to create a safer environment for yourself and a settlement you might be establishing. Almost imitating what your ancestors in the real world would have done. It's kind of like a subconscious principle about allowing one's own species to thrive and prosper at the expense of others, and perhaps it is quite human. And from there on, I started thinking about apt and encompassing theoretical frameworks for this video, looking at political science, literature, etc., but actually deciding on partially approaching this from the perspective of a natural scientific topic that I've been reading about for a while now. Mass extinctions. Yes, I will take any chance of throwing a bit of geology into any topic. 5 major mass extinctions have been discovered to have happened in Earth's history, including the one that killed the non-bird dinosaurs. There's some minor ones in between too, and when we say minor, it's still like spectacular amounts of species killed or discontinued in these. I've been to 2 sites that mark boundaries between geological periods in which mass extinctions have happened. One of these is the fish clay layer in my native Denmark that marks the end of the Cretaceous period. And here in the south of Ireland, where I'm living now, there are local exposures of the Old Red Sandstone as it overlaps from the Devonian period into the Carboniferous period.
During the southern part of Ireland, we have a series of rocks that are exposed primarily along the coast, but they tell the story of a time in Earth's history where life underwent enormous changes. This stretches from around the Middle Devonian, around 390 million years ago, to the beginning of the Carboniferous period, around 350 million years ago. This is going to probably sound really eccentric, but the Old Red Sandstone is my favorite rock. For most people who look at it, it may not seem like much, but it carries so many secrets about a time when it was that many interesting things were happening on land. During this time, Ireland was radically different. It was near the equator. There was a huge semi-arid desert-like environment with these enormous river systems that were running down from a mountain chain north from here. Back then, of course, that would have been another compass direction. Now, there was life on land during this time in the form of various invertebrates, so kind of centipede-like animals that were crawling on land. Obviously, it's hard to know exactly what most of these look like, but we see footprints of these invertebrate creatures. But during this time, something else happened. Fish were developing the precursors of limbs from their fins in the ocean, and eventually at some point they started crawling up on land. You may have seen pictures of these like Tiktaalik, Ichthyostega, Acanthostega. These are early ancestors of ours that were able to walk on land. Some of them are speculated to maybe not be our ancestors directly, but were animals that came from these tetrapods that started walking up on land. So that's what we call them. We call them tetrapods because they've got 4 limbs and they walk on these 4 limbs. And you also saw an explosion and diversification of plant life. Now, plants were already around. They're very small in the Silurian period, which preceded the Devonian, but we started seeing the first trees and the first forests, of which there's also ample evidence of here in the southern part of Ireland. And now you saw a diversification, almost a colonization of land. But even though the Devonian period shows evidence of some of the greatest positive changes to life, it also carries a dark secret. So something huge happened around 360 million years ago. We're not sure what it was, but the effect of it was that loads of species started either disappearing or stopped appearing. This is the definition of a mass extinction. Numerous species that just don't come into life or cease to exist. So there are numerous factors that are being speculated as being the source of this stress for the ecosystems, but one of them includes the advent and the success of plants. One other thing that plants did during the Devonian was that they developed roots. Now we think of roots as something that plants primarily use to get water up from the ground, but they also break up the ground in which the plant is on or in. And that's essential because it frees up nutrients. And during this time, the bedrock would have been largely untouched. So you had all of these plants that suddenly started digging into the ground with their roots, their newly acquired roots. Explosion of nutrients that were then released from the ground, from this previously untouched bedrock, and you would have seen the early formations of soils. These nutrients would have been washed away with these huge river systems that we find ample evidence of here in Cork and Kerry, and transferred to the seas, where they might have caused huge algae blooms, and these algae blooms would have shocked the ecosystem beyond comprehension. Today we see plants as something that is quintessential for the ecosystem, but back then there would actually have been quite a shock to existing species at the time. And this would likely have created a rippling effect through the various ecosystems, not only in the oceans, where it was that these algae blooms that were depleting oxygen levels would have taken place, but also on land potentially. Rocks from this time during this extinction event are exposed here in Cork, and it's actually the disappearance and the reappearance of certain species that paleontologists, meaning people who study ancient life, they use to determine when the Devonian ends and when the Carboniferous starts. So, thinking philosophically about a type of organism that thrives and blooms at the expense of all other organisms brings us back to Fallout and, us.
Humans have finally, in the Fallout universe, created a mass extinction. Widespread devastation with at least hundreds of millions of lives lost, numerous if not most species going extinct, and widespread environmental destruction. And as our characters appear, we along with them deal with the aftermath. This mass extinction brought about due to greed, various forms of entitlement and superiority that I will venture into in the longer video that I'll do. And while we luckily in the real world have yet to face such drastic outcomes of greed, various forms of entitlement, corporate cynicism, and notions of superiority, we're getting to a point where these are destroying more and more of our world. Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, is my go-to book for anyone who is denying the negative impact we have on our planet. Traveling the globe, Kolbert visits sites that show current and past destruction of life on our planet, including geological sites showing mass extinction events. Each of these sites showing how we in different aspects are changing everything incredibly fast. Kolbert's book is also a bit voyeuristic. She even admits that it's an exciting experiment that we've set to run, how we are destabilizing our biosphere and atmosphere. Mass extinctions in the past have taken place over the course of thousands of years. Even with dramatic phenomena such as an impact event or widespread volcanic eruptions, we now sit with the capacity to cause destruction equally, slightly less than or maybe even more extensively. And we are again doing it quite quickly. The effects of climate change are set to destabilize conditions that existed 150 years ago before the Industrial Age, considerably faster than most mass extinctions have occurred. And Kolbert actually hints that humans are fundamentally destructive without almost even realizing it. Going back to my point about even seeing that the player character that you are controlling in the various wastelands, who is actively curbing local populations of mutated fauna to feel safer, might be a reflection of this. That from the moment we humans entered forests, deserts, and pastures with our creativity, collective problem-solving skills, tools, and considerable aerobic base, nature was fucked. Mammoths and other animals, including the Neanderthals, went extinct perhaps because of us. Many other organisms are still going extinct because of us, and natural resources are being extracted and altered to fit our needs. And if you don't think it sounds that serious, put it this way. Millions of tons of carbon stored naturally in the underground as fossil fuels, oil, gas, etc., that have taken millions of years to get where they are, we have just started extracting these 170 years ago. They've been pumped up by us and put up into the atmosphere and into our oceans at an unprecedented rate. Not even the latest volcanic eruptions in recent history have released the same amount of volatiles as we have via our activities, and we just can't stop. This is also highlighted in Fallout's lore. Demand of resources for electricity and production overran the supply of resources required for these in the Fallout universe. Scarily similar with what's happening in the real world. We in Europe are in an energy crisis. We have enormous energy demands, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine and our response to it upset the energy supply we have in place. Despite widespread sanctions, calls for boycotts, and political denouncements of Russia, its economy and politics, we here in the EU are still relying on Russian fossil fuels. This has, of course, been complicated by political interests, particularly from North America, forcing us to get oil from other sources. Besides existing EU sources of fossil fuels, we also get millions of barrels from Norway, Kazakhstan, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and many others, and of course the United States. I really enjoyed studying geology at university. It's a fascinating subject. You can pick up a rock and tell so much from looking at the minerals, the context it was found in, the textures, the colors, and of course, the structures in it. But I remember the beginning of the end for me. We had a course on economic geology, very interesting course, but I remember the lecturer coming in basically saying, "Most of you will get jobs in the oil industry," almost as if he was casting a curse on us. That was a yikes moment for me personally, so I was like, no, I want to go to Greenland and look for Devonian tetrapod fossils or look at geochemical analyses of Eocaine serpentinites. I finished my undergraduate degree and went on to couple what I'd learned in geology with African studies for my master's, which turned out to be a great combination. But that's a story for another time, of course. But it allowed me to intersect economic geology with geopolitics and sociology. It's one of the things that frustrate me when I have political discussions with people and they want to move the conversation along of ideological conflict rather than looking at the tangible realities of land and resources in the areas of conflict. We are in a resource war, not much unlike in Fallout. In Fallout New Vegas, the struggle for energy and thus power underlies the largest conflicts in the game, and maybe even in the entire Fallout universe at that point. The NCR is given administrative control over the Hoover Dam by Mr. House, and as I said in the last video, this is how the NCR understands power. And at the other end of the map, the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel are fighting over Helios 1, a huge solar power plant that, while it can supply the area with electricity, it also has clandestine destructive capabilities. The Brotherhood of Steel lusting for technology, and in this case a potential weapon of mass destruction, and the NCR seeing the energy production of the plant relevant to its settlements and expansion. Both factions have been fighting with massive casualties over this isolated phallic symbol, eventually ending with the Brotherhood having to retreat, giving up Helios 1 and going into full isolationist mode. But the Hoover Dam is the primary example of an immense energy source that is central to the entire game itself. Here the NCR and Mr. House have agreed to share the power generated by the dam, most of it going to the NCR's territories while the rest goes to the Vegas Strip. Enter the Legion, who then want to take over the Hoover Dam, not because of the electricity. Their society is largely frugal, they sleep in tents, are very male chauvinistic, it's like an awful life. They want the Hoover Dam purely because it represents power and the defeat of the NCR. And this is also the downfall of the Legion. They only understand conquest through symbolism, and that's why they don't even try to understand what is beneath Fortification Hill, that is their own base. So, to make a point about the real world, Israel is a state that is always on the lookout for opportunities of privilege and a geopolitical upper hand. You could argue that most countries are, but the Zionist state has the advantage that a lot of Western countries support it and excuse its conduct despite breaking international law almost consistently. So, when natural gas fields were discovered in the East Mediterranean in 2000, this saw many doors opening. Negotiations over resources with Egypt began and dreams of energy independence overtook the entity. Geologically, this region is known as the Levant Basin Province and has many underground reserves of natural gas stored in geologically quite young sediments from the Paleogene and Neogene periods. Some of these have been deemed quite lucrative, for instance the Leviathan and Tamar fields that have met local demands in Israel. But overall, the gas reserves brought great optimism to Israel, especially in the face of ending reliance on East Arab countries for fossil fuels. Obviously, surveying of new fields happen all the time, and this is part of the fossil fuels industry. After all, they have a lot of money to do these things. But it may also be a bit problematic given that local government resistance groups are likely quite clued in on what Israel is trying to do off the coast. In this video filmed by Bisan, who is a Palestinian currently in Gaza reporting on the war crimes of Israel, she made this video where she's filming a ship just off the coast of South Gaza. You may think that's usual, especially in the area. I can't tell what the ship is unless of course you look at a marine tracker. It's a nice little thing to do once in a while. If you go to the website of New Med Energy, which is a major fossil fuels partnership in Israel, there's great optimism about the prospects of this expansive subterranean resource. And there's also a counter on how long ago it was that people were kidnapped from if only there was such a counter for the thousands of Palestinian hostages that have been kidnapped by Israel. Anyways, but I want to get to the point of saying it's so easy to think of all of these elements in isolation when they're very well dependent on each other as part of a greater need and system. And this is something that Fallout New Vegas also agrees with. After all, the NCR has bases in all corners of the Mojave Wasteland. They are allocating tremendous military, economic, political, legislative, infrastructural, and bureaucratic resources to maintain control over the Hoover Dam. In the real world, there's a desperate need for us here in Europe to find an appeal to fossil fuel energy producers during dire times of expected economic growth at the expense of the environment and human lives, I should also add. But in general, energy resources, where they're discovered, what they are, who owns them, and to where they flow are all incredibly important to consider, and they will change as these resources are discovered, studied, claimed, mapped, deliberately limited, and eventually exhausted. This paper here is in particular phenomenal when looking at the Leviathan field, which is one of the East Mediterranean gas fields, and this paper says, the importance of energy in the Eastern Mediterranean did not derive from the intrinsic value of natural gas that lies underneath the Mediterranean Sea. Instead, this value was ascribed to the physical resource by international market forces. This statement may seem basic for you, but it is so important, and it is why you cannot skirt over a conflict such as what is going on down in Palestine as ideological. Sure, that's what the discourse suggests, but consider that the value of a particular natural resource is obviously determined by the demand, but also by the expectations from stakeholders. That includes political actors, legislators, corporates, military, and consumers, including all the way down to young kids, both in Israel and Palestine, but also far away from that region. And as in the case of the Mojave Wasteland, expectations of energy resources from the Hoover Dam, but also from Helios 1, changed the region and societies of the Mojave Wasteland profoundly. And again, in the real world, it is through these demands and expectations that oil and gas change regional setups. And I want you to remember this notion the next time you hear a White House official say that the US have jurisdiction in Gaza, or when they try to determine what Palestinian governance should look like without even considering asking the Palestinians themselves. That is, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary friends, modern-day colonialism in broad daylight. The lucrative prospects of Gaza location adds a whole other dimension to the genocide, and this is why people who say that both sides are awful or that both Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas should be condemned These people really show their ignorance when they say such things. And I get it, it is huge both in time and space, it's complex as well, the interplay between politics and resources, but I'd wager that it is obvious to most people that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is fundamentally wrong and cruel. But leaping then on and say that this all happens due to the exploitation of our planet's resources is something that is overwhelming for a lot of people, but it is something that is also very tangible in order to understand what is going on. So, excusing one's own cynicism with the idea that they're both at fault is actually both cold and uninformed. It's a bit of jumping around, of course, talking about oil, resources, mass extinctions, when we're really focusing on the end of the world. But it all funnels down to the fact that our focus on economic growth, as it was in the Fallout universe, is eventually the driver for our extinction. It will be unless we change our attitudes to the planet and to our environments, and also to other human beings, because these are all at interplay with each other. This is exemplified with what is going on in Palestine. This is why I say that many commentators and media outlets are downplaying the severity of what is going on currently. Another Fallout entity that we can use to explore this is Voltec, the large corporation that is focused on its own survival, much to the detriment of humanity's survival, despite claiming to be invested in the latter. The company did have seemingly noble beginnings in that they were contracted to construct underground vaults in which humans could shelter from various forms of disaster. However, as the company grew massively and received funds to build these shelters, collaborating with other companies to further construction and technology, every sinister corporation cliché snuck its way into the organization and made it a destructive and potent political and corporate player. It soon was the largest corporation at the time in the Fallout universe, and soon the corporation's management realized that the end of humanity would come about soon. So instead, they changed the purpose of the vaults from one of human survival to one of human experimentation. This is what you see when visiting many of the vaults across the games. Vile and sadistic social, psychological, and physiological experiments on non-consenting human beings. Profit and science before people. In the TV series, there is an exploration of an economic and political elite that plans to enable the end of the world to, in pure Sunday morning cartoon villain form, rebuild it differently. Obviously, this is another strife of power, the power to change people and the society of humanity, a plot element that is used in much media, but still relevant in the Fallout universe and perhaps evident in today's world. In a sense, Israel is also destroying Gaza, so it is that they can run in, invade, and rebuild in their own manner and fashion and expand Israel's territories. This is something that Israeli politicians have been very vocal about, both prior to the genocide in Gaza, but also in the middle of it. But I don't know if the largest governments on our planet are purposefully trying to destroy it all through environmental destruction, economic inequality, geopolitical instability, or nuclear war, but they very well know that they're on the path of doing so. And this paints a foreboding and exceptionally bleak outlook on humanity, so much so that it is up to us average people to collectively push for change or to bring about change themselves. I still see people online and in offline commentaries complaining about the loudness of pro-Palestinian voices and marches and initiatives. Even when I'm marching here in Ireland, you'd hear a few individuals who come over and lampoon us by saying that we support terrorism, that we should stop, and whatever. Every single part of it is a joy of marching. But honestly, it's where I've connected with my own humanity and a validation for my capacity to care about the issues. Because I could take a nihilistic stance on it and say that, well, the world is going to end regardless, and humanity is on the brink of self-destruction. And I could sit down and play video games until the world is ending and until I have no electricity to play video games in. And by then, what do? A lot of people, including myself, wish we had said something earlier about Palestine. Maybe it would have made a difference if the amount of people who were vocal about Palestinian liberation were vocal 10 years ago, for instance. Maybe it wouldn't. But in any case, I think it's time to say that if we know of future generations, that could be our own children or a friend's child or other family members who are young at this moment, wouldn't it be worth just making a bit of effort to make sure that they have something to live for in the future. As Elizabeth Kolbert also hints at in her book, we have an amazing capacity for creativity and problem solving that is also destructive but can yield much good. And it is this good that I actually want to see more of in people. I do think that it can happen through dialogue, through discussions, through education, but also through visibility, through marches, and by helping people who are being subjugated in the most violent and cruel ways by our doing.
I think a lot about the intersection between academia and the corporate world, in particular these days, where it is very evident that the corporates are utilizing the knowledge that we produce, like fossil fuel industries, obviously, in which geology has contributed greatly to. How much of what we glorify today is the product of obviously a lot of knowledge that has been produced, the technology that we also have developed using that knowledge, but our hopes and our dreams for furthering the cause of humanity in different ways. This is not only to understand the world better, but also ourselves, but to actually get to a point where we are happier and better off. And this, of course, makes us ask, what is it that we're doing all of this for? I think it's very human to have an existential crisis these days, and oftentimes the question begs, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life to be killed or to kill? And somehow it's a bit weird we're asking that when we instead could be asking, what do we want out of life? And obviously it's hard to collectivize humanity, but in a sense, we have done so with these insane systems that exploit our resources and exploit our fellow human beings. How do we want life to be represented? Do we want other species to survive the ongoing crisis that we're causing? And if you ask a lot of people today, they are probably too caught up in modernity to think that they are relevant in replying those questions. This goes to all of us. You watching this, me producing this video. What kind of a world do we want to live in? And all of the technology and the knowledge that we have that is currently being used to destroy the planet and to destroy humanity can actually also be the solutions and help guide us to some forms of salvation. I don't have the answers to what those forms of salvations can be, but I do see so many solutions being implemented and put in place. The problem is, right now we have systems in place that are inhibiting our efforts at securing a better future. As is very evident with the student encampments at various universities around the world, we see people realizing that the institutions are very much part of this. Despite a lot of well-meaning research being constructed in these institutions, they are also very much part of the destruction of our world. And we can talk about competitiveness that exists in the natural world as well, and thus we see it represented so fiercely in humanity. I think it's also embarrassing in a way that we have technology, we have knowledge that could counter these and produce a world that is better and somehow more constructive, that we have the choice to save species that are suffering from the environmental damage that we're causing. We have the potential to end poverty and also to create more sustainable ways that we are wasting our resources. And obviously this requires us to make some very difficult sacrifices. I could have these YouTube channels if it wasn't for the way that we're exploiting our planet, and I'd probably have to say goodbye to that as well. And I'd have to ask, is that a sacrifice I'd be willing to make? And ironically, we would not know what the are going through if we didn't have this insane technology that allows us to view gigabytes of video from the other side of the planet. We are an insane amount of people on this planet. There's a lot of resources that have to be shared amongst us. There's a lot of people out there who wouldn't accept a world where we're working towards a better environment, compassion for our fellow human beings. Those things are really hard to sell, and that's what we see today. I also think that we are much unhappier. Denmark, where I'm from, has been deemed to be one of the happiest places on the planet and has even ranked first sometimes on some happiness indices. But at least 400,000 people are on antidepressants in Denmark. We're not happy. we're deeply caught up in modernity. Despite for a long time having had great social services in terms of healthcare, security if you lose your job, education, I'd argue that we're actually extremely unhappy. And this is opposite what I see in my mother's country, where there's a great social culture, a better community understanding. Now, people are not happy there because of the extreme poverty that exists. But on the other hand, they do have a strong community culture and are more socially engaging. And this, I think, is what creates human happiness. I think this idea about modernity, the way that we buy things, excessive consumption, conspicuous consumption, it all contributes to an awful amount of unhappiness. This is something that New Vegas actually shows brilliantly in the way that Mr. House employs these tribes, takes them in from the wasteland into New Vegas to give them a sense of safety and a sense of modernity that exists within New Vegas, basically inviting them into this realm of capitalism, modernity inside of New Vegas, dressing them up, fueling the economy of New Vegas, getting them into a system of control that makes them think that they're in some bubble of safety or that they are in control of the situation, while obviously Mr. House is scheming and deciding the fate of New Vegas, but also of the Mojave Wasteland in the background. We could also talk about the way that the NCR is written in New Vegas, how we see an organization that is also political, corporate, and militant, not unlike many major governments today. And this huge organization is able to cement a lot of control through bureaucracy, through aggressive military force, through a military presence, and through economic initiatives. It's not just that, it's the entire foundation of the Fallout universe. This idea that the world ends because a corporation decides to exercise control at the expense of humanity. And in the end, in order to fulfill its own principles and its own targets, economic or political, it sacrifices humanity. It not only destroys the environment and most of humanity, but also causes a severe mass extinction. I've spoken to most of my family members about this, and there is a strong realization that what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people is fundamentally wrong in so many ways. But what there is a lack of still is not only skepticism in the establishment, there is still a fundamental trust in our politicians and in the belief that our politicians are acting for the betterment of people. No, I'm generalizing by saying that, but the political system globally centers around money making, not only in furthering the GDP of the country that the government represents, but also to create a global system of people who make claims to resources that they extract and who are in a fierce competitive scheme with various countries and who need to be in alliances with greater economic and militant powers to stand strong on the global scene. And all of this, of course, creates this whirlwind where we, the people, unfortunately get caught up in decisions that are out of our control. And the lack of realizing that most of our governments do not have us people in mind when they're taking decisions is scary. And it is horrifying to think about, no doubt about it. But I think it's necessary to do, because positive change is not going to come from our politicians deciding that, oh, maybe we should start caring about people now. No, it's going to come from people who decide that we've had enough. So if you already have a pre-existing skepticism in our politicians, it's about taking that to the next level, turning that into an absolute fed-upness, and then turning that into resistance. Resistance is going to be key in the coming times. Most people would love to sit and be comfortable in their houses and not speak out too much about social issues and fears of losing their jobs or being socially ostracized. But I think if anyone has the capacity to do that these days and has a sense of anger about recent elections, has a sense of anger about political apathy or cynicism that exists among them in their culture, in their society, now is a good time to see what could be done, to find local initiatives, to link up to other people who are fed up of being held hostage in a system that's just brutal. And now tens of thousands of people mass murdered by an state. With our support, motivation, our money, our weaponry, our knowledge, our technology, all of it focused into an area that is less than 400 per square kilometers, and it's still controversial to speak out against it. Something's got to give. And I think it goes back to asking, what do we want out of life? What do we want to see? And to a certain extent, it's embarrassing that we've created all of this technological progress and all of this beautiful knowledge, and that we're using it for this. That we have solutions, we have ideas for how the world could be bettered. And that's the achievement of humanity. Probably do more where I'm out in the open. This is lovely. A bit of a small oasis in a lot of terrifying circumstances, but yeah.
But I do want to end on a positive note, and an answer to the title of this video. I realize that I've not talked enough about Ukraine and Russia here, especially since Ukraine has poked at Russia's nuclear weapons infrastructure recently. What is essential here is again the capacity for destruction and how it actually boils down to the influences that the West exert globally, something that the Fallout universe also touch on quite a lot. While I totally support the Ukrainians' right to defend themselves against Russia, the conditional setup of US and European proxy warfare makes me sick to my stomach. The US insane flows of money and weapons to Israel to kill and subjugate Palestinians, all of this financed by US taxpayers, who do not even see the benefits of their money the same way as we may do in some European countries. And they have these to contend with. And we're not much better over here in Europe. We also have to realize that our tax money and economies are supporting a lot of shit and death being committed around the world. For what exactly? Imperialism and power, for which very little happiness will be yielded. Oh yeah, the positive note, of course. If you're feeling angry these days, which I am almost every day, realizing how evil our culture and our establishment is, how many innocent people are daily killed due to Western imperialism, realizing that our politicians have zero to give us or towards a sustainable future, then embrace this anger. Be angry, be sad when you watch images of children crying after losing limbs, homes, parents or their friends. Be angry that our tax money and political support is being sent to a state that is so undescribably ungrateful, tyrannical and vicious. And that you are being lied to like these people think you're a fucking idiot. They want you to think that Benjamin Netanyahu is the corrupt element. They want you to think that Hamas is a terrorist organization in isolation of everything that has happened, detached from the Zionist occupation and violence. They want you to believe that the war on terror was a movement for democracy and civilizing the East. You should be able by default to look at speeches and statements by Biden, David Cameron, Rishi Sunak, Ursula von der Leyen, Mette Frederiksen, and expect that these people are lying to you as a first resort and as the only resort. This is not being a conspiracy theorist, but it is the beginning of uncovering and cleverly analyzing political discourse. Same with every headline you're reading in the newspapers or on TV, including the ones I've highlighted. Read the article. How are certain stakeholders triumphed, positioned and criticized? No news article is completely objective, and you realize that it's quite fun to sit and do these analyses. While most major news outlets here in Ireland occasionally describe Israeli soldiers and weapons as the cause of death of Palestinians, they don't cover the erroneous colonial and manipulative discourse uttered by Biden's administration, and thus many still see current US and European leaders as having good intentions, though also being flawed and faced with difficult choices. A little bit similar to the Fallout games, you have to consider every possibility of different factions. Talking to people, uncovering if they're honest or hiding something, mostly from the perspective of who can yield the most benefits for you and other characters. Sometimes you have to forego certain decisions because you can't find a solution to them, but also you have to see who aligns morally with you the most. The major difference here is that in video games you are responsible for fictional or digital deaths rather than actual human beings. But what is important is that you have the capacity and time to become informed, and to respect yourself and how these stakeholders talk to you. You also have the capacity to resist and to organize. This can happen passively by boycotts. You can get the No Thanks app, in which you can boycott condoning products, or even more actively by joining protests in your area. Talk to other people who find this just as infuriating and emotionally crippling. And you can of course still work and play video games in your spare time. Those things are not taken from you. But there will be a strong need for these sort of initiatives in the future, as more and more systems of power are allowed to get away with more violence, death, and destruction. The world may be ending, or we may be close to allowing it to end, but maybe we can stop some of it. If you have kids, you're likely envisioning them having a future, though also seeing that this future may be strained due to current circumstances in the real world. Consider that you're fighting for these young people to be able to see a better world. I know loads of kids in my family, in my social circles. I love interacting with these kids. I love to hear about their perspectives of the world, and sometimes you get surprised with how clued in they actually are and how they understand things prior to the manipulation of this cold and cynical culture that we have. But of course, you may also be a person who loves to see human suffering. You may be someone who will never be able to humanize people simply because they have Arab, cultural, and identity markers. You may be a person who still thinks that both sides are wrong, but that's your choice in life and morals and ethics and all that. But one day, if we prevent mass destruction of humanity and I live to experience it, I would like for young people to come up to me when the situation in Gaza is officially referred to as a genocide, and have them ask me what I was spending time doing these days. And I would like to say that I joined rallies, I donated money to Palestinians who were struggling, I boycotted Israeli and genocide condoning products, and that I cared and spoke out about it. Not putting pressure on anyone, of course, that's just my choice, and ideally also a choice I wish more people would take. I am also fortunate that I live in a part of the world where it's more socially acceptable to be anti-genocide. And I know some of you don't. And again, we can still enjoy video games. I will put up an episode here soon where I'm playing through things like Core. And of course, as always, take care of yourself in the meanwhile, because we do need to go to work, we do need to pay our mortgages, we do need to socialize, we do need to have emotional connections with people. We do need all those things that are important for us and our biological systems. And those also need to be prioritized. It's difficult, these are difficult times, but I think it's okay to realize that too, and not to be too hard on oneself.